thanks very much, everybody, for coming along to this training session, which is all going to be about developing a maintenance plan for your church building. If you haven't met me before, I'm Janet Edmond, a member of the Stewardship and Income Generation team, and I'm joined on the session today by my colleague Stephen Craven, who is a Church and Building Support Officer with the DAC team. I'm sure you all know Stephen. I'll deliver the first part of the session today, and then Stephen will take over the second part of the session. Now, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions via the chat function on Zoom, and that should be probably along the bottom of your screen. There's a little chat function. If you click on that, you can type in a question if you like as we go along, and if we've got time, we'll try and pick that up. But it's more likely what we'll do is we'll pick up at the end of the session. We'll pick up any questions, and we'll leave enough time at the end of the session to do that. You know as well that the session is being recorded, as I said, and we will be making the recording available on the diocesan website, and also the presentation itself, the slides of the presentation, will also be available on the website as well. So just before we start, okay, so developing a maintenance plan for your building. This is the second session in a series of church training sessions that we have been working on, and we're delivering during spring. The other sessions that we have are health and safety in your church building, which is happening on the 17th of March. And that one is being delivered by a colleague from Ecclesiastical Insurance. And then in April, although we haven't yet got a date for that yet, but we are going to be setting that soon. That is going to be entitled Stewardship of the Environment, and that's going to be delivered by members of the DSE team and environment team. So that'll be a good one to come along to as well. The sessions are being recorded, and you can see the link there in blue where you can actually find that that recording of the last session, which was the maintenance of church buildings and churchyards, and that's where this one will be as well. That part of the DAC pages on the website is going to be revamped at some point, and the information will move to the link that's in yellow there, the church building / maintenance page. That hasn't been set up yet, but at some point in the future it will be. I don't know when that's going to be, but if you do have any problems finding anything, you can always email myself or Stephen, and our contact details will be at the back. Now, before we go on with the session, if anybody has just joined us, if you could please just mute your microphone and turn off your camera, that'd be really handy. Thanks very much. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. This is what we're going to be covering in the agenda today. We're going to be looking at why you need a maintenance plan, the stages to actually developing a maintenance plan, what you need to do, to make your maintenance plan come alive. And then we're going to be looking at some case studies as well, because throughout the session today, I'm going to be using examples from some of our own churches in the diocese who have set up their own maintenance plan. So I'll be looking at some of their examples as we go through. Stephen is then going to be talking about, staying aware, things that are maybe not included in your maintenance plan, but things that you need to continue to be aware of, and also talking about crime awareness as well. And then at the end, we'll have time for the questions and answers. So before we get started on the maintenance planning side itself, I wanted to just recap on what the benefits of preventative maintenance actually are. And last time in the first session, I talked about sustainability. And what I wanted to just recap on was that, you know, preventative maintenance itself is really important because it will help us to sustain the good conditions of our buildings, our church buildings. And by doing that, you know, it will help to maintain our building fabric. If we do regular maintenance, our building fabric will be in much better condition, keep them watertight, and then it makes them a more welcoming place for our community and congregations to come in and use the building, and obviously also will preserve our building for future worship as well. And as well as that, sustaining the condition of the building, regular maintenance also helps to improve the environmental sustainability of our buildings. And environmental sustainability is something that we're hearing an awful lot about at the moment in the news as the world gets ready to tackle climate change and also reduce the carbon footprint. And so, you know, looking after a building, carrying out regular maintenance also helps us to improve the environmental sustainability of our church buildings because it helps to maintain the building, keeping it watertight. That helps to save on our heating bills and reduce our energy consumption, and in turn that helps to reduce our carbon footprint for our buildings as well. And by avoiding costly repairs, we're also helping to reduce the amount of energy we use on repairs and the materials as well. So that, again, preventative maintenance can be seen as sustainable in that way. Now, last but not least, regular maintenance does help to sustain our PCC finances as well, because regular maintenance does help us to avoid those costly repair bills and helps our PCC finances stretch that little bit further. So all in all, preventative maintenance does help to achieve sustainable church buildings. So why do you need a maintenance plan in the first place? Well, it will help you in the first place to identify and record any defects that you can find in your building. It will help you with it's more, when you think about your quinquennial inspection that happens every 5 years, that's just a survey of your building at a particular point in time. But within that 5-year period, a lot can happen to your building. A lot of things can happen, a lot of defects can happen. And so that regular maintenance and sorting out a maintenance plan will help you to keep a check on that and monitor it in between your quinquennial inspections. The maintenance plan is also important because by having the maintenance plan written down, something that you can look at, it will help you organise what maintenance tasks you need to carry out and when you need to do them. So it's something that you can work out and then follow, you know, on a regular basis. And other people can help you follow it as well. And by having that plan, you can also work out and organise what people you need to help you with your maintenance plan and help you look after the building. And it may be volunteers that you have, church warden, or it may be contractors as well. And so you can have all of that information in your maintenance plan too. And again, as I said earlier about maintenance helping to save you money in the long run, within the maintenance plan itself, you can also record the costs that relate to your maintenance. Costs of work that needs carrying out, costs of contractors coming, and that helps you to plan your finances as well, whether it's an annual cost or maybe further ahead as well, as we'll see in some of the examples I'm going to show you. So it will help you to organise the finances needed for regular maintenance. And last but not least, but something that is really important, and I'm sure a lot of you are already aware of, is that a maintenance plan is something that is now a requirement of grant funders. So if you're applying for a grant, I'm pretty sure that most of them will be saying, can you provide evidence of the maintenance that you carry out on your building? And I can understand why that has become so important for funders, because if they're funding you to repair your roof or replace part of the stonework or whatever, they want to make sure that you have a maintenance plan in place that will help to stop those defects happening again, and so that they're not wasting their money by giving you money and then you're not able to maintain the building in the future. So that is a really important thing to consider. If you don't have a maintenance plan, it's something that you need to be thinking about really, really quickly. So what are the stages to developing a maintenance plan? Last session, I talked about the key elements of maintenance, and I picked out inspection, that's inspecting your building or looking at your building and looking to see what the condition of it is, and also the carrying out of the regular maintenance itself. These were the things I looked at as being important in looking at maintenance. And then there's also the minor repairs as well. Well, all of these aspects are part of developing a maintenance plan, because the looking part, the inspection, is what you need to do first, is in the first stage, if you like, in developing your plan. And then looking at the regular maintenance tasks that you need to carry out. And then, although the minor repairs might not be on your maintenance plan, the maintenance plan itself and the information that you record will help you to identify what minor repairs might need doing. So these are the sorts of stages that I wanted to look at now. And I talked about inspecting your building as being kind of like the first stage in your maintenance plan and the development of your plan. So looking at your building. And so where do you start? If you're new to being a church warden, or if you're new to looking after the building, where do you start with looking at your building? What do you do first? Well, the first thing that I would recommend you to do is to look at a maintenance checklist, something that you can find. There are quite a few templates around for maintenance checklists, but I'm going to be looking and recommending the one that was developed last year by Historic England in collaboration with SPAB, that's the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings, and the National Churches Trust. And this particular checklist, they've worked on it together. They've looked at a really good and simple template that you can download from each of their websites. And I've actually given you a link to downloading the maintenance checklist here on this page. That's the underlined maintenance checklist. When you get the presentation slides, you can go there and actually download it for yourself. And this particular maintenance checklist, you can see the top of it here in the picture. It's an introduction to a maintenance checklist, and it will help you to identify in the first place and record problems that you can see when you're going around looking at your building, inspecting all the different areas. You can mark the information that you find down on the checklist, but it's also important that you also have a logbook, a separate book where you can write down in more detail any defects and information that you find as you're carrying out your inspection. And I'll show you some examples of the logbook as we go along. The other thing I thought was really useful for, when you start to carry out your inspection is maybe setting up a maintenance equipment kit as well. Things that will help you to carry out your inspection and also to carry out some regular maintenance tasks. And I'm going to be giving you some examples of what should be in that kit as well as we go through. So that's the maintenance checklist. That's the first place to start. Actually using the maintenance checklist, this is a picture here of the maintenance checklist I've been talking about that Historic England have developed. And this is one section of it, the first section, which is dedicated to looking at your roof. It's actually, the whole checklist is divided into 5 separate categories. There's a category on roofs, there's one on rainwater goods, there's also a section on looking at the external parts of your building, there's also a section on the interior, and then there's also a section on building services, and that takes into account things like your PAT testing, and also firefighting equipment that needs checking regularly, and also your electrical testing of your wiring and your heating systems as well. So that takes in all of those building services. And this is how it's set out on the checklist, the template itself, which you can download. So there's a section there for the maintenance task that you should be looking at, you should be carrying out. There's a section there for the person who could carry out the work, whether it's a contractor or a volunteer. There's a frequency suggested at which how often you should carry out the inspection or the maintenance task. There's a section for costs, and then there's a bit of a calendar there. It's divided up into quarters. That's when you want to carry out the tasks. And then there's also noting of observations as well. Although I did mention that you need a logbook to put more detail in there. Now, to help you, SPAB and Historic England and NCT have actually collaborated as well on a series of really, really good videos that you can watch. You can get these videos by clicking on the link that I've put into the maintenance playlist button there. And you can watch each of these videos, and they're linked to each category in the checklist. So how to look at maintaining your building services, maintain your church interiors, so on, so on. So look at each of these videos. It's a really good place to start. And the gentleman that introduces the videos, James Innerdale, he's very good. He is a conservation architect and an inspecting architect, and he works a lot with the SPAB. He's really good at explaining the things that you need to do. It's a really good starting point. So I thoroughly recommend that you have a look at those. I mentioned about the maintenance kit, and for anybody that's just joined the session, I've just admitted someone, if you could mute yourself, that would be fantastic. So I mentioned about the maintenance equipment kit that would be a good idea to set up. This is some suggestions of what you can include in the kit. Binoculars, really useful for looking up at the high level parts of your building. If you've got safe access onto your tower, and I do stress safe access, that's great. You'll be able to have a look, you know, at the higher areas. But if not, you can use your binoculars to look up and see if there's any slipped tiles, or if you maybe some repointing that needs doing. But really useful thing to have. Obviously, health and safety equipment such as safety glasses, goggles, first aid kit. A camera is really useful as well. You can use your mobile phone camera. And as you're going around, looking at your building, taking photographs of any problem areas that you see is a really good idea. Maybe have a plan of the building as well, so you can mark on your plan where you've taken the photographs. That's all really good information to look at afterwards and include in your maintenance plan. It will help you as well to monitor defects. So if you spot a problem, take a picture of it. Next time you check, have a look and see if it's got worse. Take another photograph. You can compare them then. So a really good way to monitor your building, taking photographs. And I've included in here a ladle as well, because a ladle is quite a useful thing to have when you're looking at your drains, your lower drains. They might look like they're running freely and they're not blocked, but when you take the grating off, there may be some silt actually below the surface. And the picture there is just showing an example of actually scooping collected silt in the bottom of the drain out of the drain. So that's a really useful thing to include. So I mentioned that there were some churches in the diocese that have actually helped by providing their maintenance plans. And I'm using examples from them today. And here you can see two examples. The top one is the maintenance plan of St. John the Baptist. The bottom one is from St. Giles Pontefract. And both of these churches have actually used the maintenance checklist that I mentioned at the very beginning. they've used that document and they've downloaded the template, and then they've made it bespoke for themselves. So they've gone to use the template and then adapted it to suit their specific church and how they want to manage their maintenance. And the first thing that you'll see in both of these examples is that both of them have actually divided up the quarterly calendar sections on the template into monthly divisions, so that they found that that's a really good way of helping them to decide and to indicate how often they're going to check things. So for instance, in the roof section here of their plans, they've been, St John's have decided that they want to check their roofs, generally have an inspection of the roofs every month, and also after stormy weather or bad weather. And now if you look down to St Giles, Pontefract, you'll see that they've also got the calendar divisions, but they've decided that they're just going to have a look annually at the roof areas, but also after every stormy weather event. So they've decided to look at it in different ways, which is absolutely fine. They've also used the plans to indicate whether they want a contractor to carry out the work or a volunteer. And you can see that in both plans here, we've got contractors added in there for some of the inspection of the higher areas of the roof, but the general roof inspection can be done by a volunteer. Looking at St Giles Pontefract example there with the circle, you can see that they've got a name written in there, Bill, and a number. And Bill is somebody within their team that they have identified responsibility for checking the roof areas on a regular basis. So what they've done is they've kind of divided up their team and actually assigned responsibility to people in their team for different things. And as we go through their plan, you'll see that they've got different people for different areas of responsibility. I think that's a really good thing to do. If you've got enough people in your team, that's a great thing to do, so that you divide up the responsibility. They've also got the number 1 there, which they use to link to their church logbook, so that they can cross-reference any notes that they note down about the roof areas generally. They can cross-reference it to the logbook under number 1. And I've shown you a picture here of the church logbook, which is the one that has been developed by the Church of England and is available to purchase from their website. And I've included a link on it here. But is the one that we recommend as well. It costs about £15, I think, to buy. But I would suggest you have a look at that one if you haven't already got a logbook. The other thing I was going to say here was that if you're not sure when you're starting your plan how often you should be carrying out certain tasks, maintenance tasks, you could have a look at the calendar of care that the Church of England have produced. And there's a link to the calendar of care here from the picture. And it just sets out the sorts of things that you should be doing every month, suggestions as to how often you should check things. So it'll give you a start as well. So I wanted to look at a bit more detail here at, this is St Giles Pontefract's maintenance plan. And what's really interesting here is this is about a different part of the plan. This is the category of rainwater disposal. And so it's a different section on the checklist. And how they've used this here is they've not only suggested who is carrying out the work. So Peter and David are responsible for looking after rainwater disposal, but they've also put in some costings here as well. And just before I go on, if anybody's joined, could they just mute themselves? That would be great, thank you, because we're recording the video. So they've actually put in some costings, and they've not only just put in an annual costing for clearing their rainwater goods away, and that's the cost of the contractor at £250. They've also gone a little bit further in their planning, and they're looking at a 10-year cost of £2,500. So they're thinking ahead, you know, as to how planning finances for the future. I think that's a really useful thing to do. And again, I can't stress enough to use the church logbook in collaboration with your maintenance plan. As well as the regular maintenance tasks that need carrying out with your rainwater goods, that's an example, there's also the cyclical maintenance tasks that you might need to carry out. Now, this is another section from St Giles's plan. This is the building services section. And here they've kind of adapted it even more. They've split it up into yearly checks, because cyclical maintenance might only need to be done every couple of years or every 5 years. Here, that testing is every year, and their wiring and electrical installation inspection is carried out every 5 years. So they've added that in to their plan as well. And the other thing is that by doing that, you know, by including the costings into the maintenance plan, you can then tot up what your annual maintenance cost might be, and helps you to plan your finances then. So for St Giles, they didn't mind me sharing these costs, but their annual cost for regular maintenance was £7,350. And their 10-year cost for regular maintenance is £73,500. But their total cost for cyclical tasks over 10 years is £10,000. So that gives them a good sense of what they need to be planning for financially and whether they need to raise funding. If I could just ask Janet, if you could just mute yourself, please, that'd be great, because we're recording the session.
Oh, sorry. You need
I've just muted you, so that's fine. Okay, so next then, that's the maintenance plans that I wanted to show you those examples. I mean, there's a lot more we could say about it, and not enough time, but if you download the template, you can have a look through yourself and then come back to Stephen and I if you want more help on that. But I think when I touched upon the costs there and the 10-year costs, I think you get an idea about, you know, the importance of the financial planning side, and also how expensive maintenance can become, especially if it's a repair that needs doing, a costly repair. And I mentioned in the last session about this particular document. It's a report that was commissioned by Historic England 2019 called the Economic Value of Maintenance, and you can find a report at this particular link here. But what this report looked at, it looked at 30 churches across the country. It looked at their QI reports for over 15 years, so that's 3 successive QI reports, and they looked at the first report to see what items of maintenance had been flagged up as being necessary. And then they looked at the third report, the most recent report, to find out what maintenance hadn't actually been carried out. So whether stuff that had been flagged up in the first report had actually gone through to not being addressed even in the third report. And what they found was that overall was that poor maintenance definitely led to an increase in cost for churches, for those 30 churches. And in particular, what they found was that by delaying repairs that had been flagged up in the QI report, or delaying any repairs, actually led to an increased cost for those repairs, and also because of consequential damage that happened as well. So there may have been a defect somewhere in the building that wasn't put right, and as a result of that maybe leaky roof, there was damage elsewhere in the building. So that was the consequential damage, and the cost became much greater. Another thing that they found was that the roof and rainwater goods were the most important regular maintenance areas, because these were the areas that could actually cause most damage and could cause the consequential decay if they weren't put right. So checking your roof regularly, checking and maintaining your rainwater goods was so important in terms of limiting consequential decay and limiting the overall cost. So that's a really good report to have a look at if you have time to go through it. So finally, before Stephen takes over, I just wanted to link maintenance planning with your QI report a little bit. I did mention that the QI report is obviously, something that is carried out every 5 years, and in between, you still need to look at your building and check for problems. But when you do have your QI report, there will be a section in it that says what maintenance items need to be carried out. So when you're developing your maintenance plan, do look at your quinquennial inspection report and see what your inspecting architect has actually put down there for you to check. And that can be programmed into your maintenance plan to help you plan what sort of maintenance needs to be carried out. And within this example here, you can see that at the bottom of the page, there's the gutters and fall pipes, clear apps, parapet gutter of silt, and clear northeast apps. That's a priority action, it needs doing. And there's also an estimated cost there and a photograph that has been included by the architect. So because the architect will put in some estimated costs for that work to be done, that's something else that can help you with the financial side and the financial planning in your maintenance plan. You can add those costs in. So that's all I wanted to say really about the maintenance plan side. Stephen is actually going to take over now and talk about, oh no, he's not. Apologies. I'm getting ahead of myself. I forgot entirely that I was going to quickly talk about some case studies. Do apologise. So I have been talking about St John's Wakefield, and they actually allowed me to explain to you as well that, and this is a quote from them, that their maintenance plan actually came out of a different checklist that they originally had. And here's an example of their original routine checklist. And they've got they had a color-coded routine checklist. So all the things in red needed to be checked monthly, all the things in blue, quarterly, and so on. And this is what they were using. But then when they applied for a grant to the National Churches Trust, they found that it was a requirement of the National Churches Trust that they needed to do a maintenance plan as well. And so what they did was they took the information from their checklist and they translated it over quite easily, they said, into the maintenance plan checklist that I showed you at the beginning, the one that was developed by Historic England and NCT and SPAB. So they were able to take all of their information from the routine checklist and just transfer it over and develop their maintenance plan that way. And that was for their grant application. So I did say, that major funders will need a maintenance plan, and that's one thing to bear in mind. And it's a good example, I think. But that they still use both their routine checklist and their maintenance plan. They still find that they're both really helpful to use, because one of them has day-to-day information in it and the other one is more of the planning ahead, and they feel that they need to do further work on their longer term planning and on their maintenance plan. So that's a very honest information there from St John's. I talked about St Giles as well. They sent me some really useful images when they started to look at their building on a regular basis. They had been thinking that the timbers, or the roof timbers, looked really robust. However, when they explored a little bit further and started regular inspections, they found actually that the timbers were actually quite rotten in areas where they went into the wall, and they hadn't realised that. And they found that it then needed a really expensive structural repair. They had noted a leak, and they're just saying, you know, that bear in mind that leaks that are left unchecked can lead to more expensive repairs, and that's what happened in this case. The middle picture there is just a general picture of the poor condition on the roof, where some of the mortars come away there from the lead flashing and causing leaking there in the roof. So that's, again, you know, they've been really honest, saying that really important that you have the plan. Another example they gave us was that when they started checking on a regular basis, they noticed signs of beetle activity in some of the timbers, and so as a result of that, they went ahead and had a roof timber survey done, a complete timber survey done, which cost them £200. It sounded like quite a lot of money, but that actually helped them to identify what the problem was, and they were able to fix it. If they'd left that unchecked, that could have been an extremely expensive repair, possibly roof replacement, if the timbers were all invested. So another really good example. Also, your maintenance plan helps you to deal with health and safety issues as well for you and for people within using your building. An example of a chorister slipping on some steps that had mold on them, they've now put that into their maintenance plan, that they make sure those steps are cleared twice a year. So that's another reason for having a maintenance plan, is the health and safety aspect for you. So they've, you know, quite clearly said that having that plan, that maintenance plan, has really saved them a lot of money. So really good quote there. And before I do hand over to Stephen, I just wanted to mention the Naylor Award. Now, this is an award for excellence in church maintenance, and it's presented by the National Churches Trust every year. And last year it was won by one of our churches. It was Christchurch, Surrey Bridge. They won £7,500 that they're now going to put towards maintenance. And the reason that they won it was because the judges thought that they recognised the work that they were doing on their maintenance, and how their maintenance actually involved so many people, not just a few people, but it was a real organised team effort, which involved regular communication with their architect, presented to the PCC regularly so that the PCC knew what was going on, and the church wardens and volunteers, they all worked together to tackle maintenance. And in particular, they used social media, they used their Facebook page to keep their congregation and the community informed as well of what maintenance news and issues they had. And actually helped to attract volunteers from the community to come and help with maintenance. And there's a picture here of members of the community coming and helping to paint a fence, for instance. So that was a really good news story that I wanted to share with you, and something to aspire to, I think. And really useful to have £7,500, I think, to put towards maintenance if you're able to win it. So I'm going to hand over to Stephen now to carry on the next part of the session.
Right, thank you, and hello everyone. So we've already mentioned the QI report, so just to add a couple of things there. As Janet said earlier, it is a condition report, and it's important to remember that the building will change over the next 5 years, sort of before the next inspection is due. And so it's important not just to attend to the urgent requirements of the report when you get it, but also then to continue doing maintenance so that hopefully next time the architect can record that the church is in fair or good condition. It's important to remember, though, that the quinquennial isn't a specification, but if any work needs doing, you will, that's beyond just the sort of DIY level work, where you're going to have to get a contractor involved, then you do need to think in terms of specifying work. That doesn't necessarily need to involve your architect, but it might do, depending on the nature of the work. And that also to be aware, although the guidance for template for quinquennial now includes for a cost estimate to be put against any work that's required, that's really just the architect's sort of rough figure, off the top of their head, as it were. They're not expected to go and get quotes in order to give you that estimated figure. So it's just a rough guide, and you will still expect to go and get, good practice is you get at least 2 quotes for work that's going to cost more than a small amount. Next slide, please. So staying aware. So looking out for the ways in which new maintenance or repair tasks might crop up in between one inspection and the next. Weather damage is a major category. We've already seen that in the maintenance plan might well involve inspecting perhaps once or twice a year around your building, and then also after a storm. So these are examples of damage that you might notice after heavy rain or heavy wind. So you might see wet staining on the walls that indicate around the downpipe that indicates there's a blockage somewhere. That needs to be dealt with as soon as possible before the water gets into the wall and makes it worse. You might notice cracks or loose stones in the churchyard wall. Again, they should be attended to before it gets to the point where the whole wall collapses, like this one has done. And then there are trees. We do recommend that your maintenance plan should include a tree survey. We would suggest every 5 years. That is a survey by a professional who will look out for signs that the tree might be becoming weaker or getting towards the end of its life, or becoming a bit overgrown and need pruning back. But sometimes even a professional might not notice a sort of hidden defect in a tree, or it might be that it's a few years since your last survey and the tree is weakened in that time, and a heavy storm, a gale, will be the sort of last straw that causes a branch or maybe even the whole tree to fall. So again, after a storm, do have a look round and see if there are any trees that maybe have shed branches or are looking as if they might do, and get those dealt with as soon as possible. Next. The other thing to be aware of, the other thing that can cause deterioration of your church building is deliberate human action, so theft and vandalism. Unfortunately, metal theft is still a problem. A few years ago, you might remember, the government passed legislation that made it illegal for a scrapyard to pay cash for scrap metal. That was intended to deter thieves from stealing metal off buildings and then just sort of selling it for cash to leave no traces, as it were. Unfortunately, that hasn't solved the problem, and there are still quite, so we quite often get spates in a particular area of theft of metal. And the 3 areas where you might see that most obviously are lead flashings, which are quite an easy target, again, you might not necessarily see these from ground level. It's sometimes a case of getting up on the ladder where you can do so safely, or looking out from the tower, look down on the roofs, look from a distance with binoculars, and see if just keep an eye out regularly for any signs that flashings may have been stolen, because that's an easy way for water to get into the building and cause damage inside. Metal downpipes is another. It's not unknown for someone just to come along and rip off the bottom of the downpipe, and again that needs fixing quite quickly before water gets into the stonework. And lead or copper roofs. Now, this is an example. The illustration there is from church in Liverpool diocese, where someone has got into a valley gutter which isn't visible from the from ground level, and has stripped off a large amount of the copper sheeting. So again, that's something that you need to keep an eye open for. And the fourth area is lightning conductors. Again, they're usually made of copper and can be a target for thieves. Next slide, please. So if you know, and yes, and two other areas beyond metal theft where it's worth looking out. Stone paving flags. We've had quite a spate in the last year or so of people stealing stone flags from churchyards because they do have a significant value on the second-hand market, or as a black market, as it were. So again, that's something to look out for. Because it's not only creating a trip hazard, it can leave paths muddy and not easy to use. The other thing is to have a look at your windows from time to time, see if there are any signs either of actual breakage of the windows or where someone's forced the window guard off or tried to get in through the window guards. Again, that can be a sign that vandals are targeting your building, or that thieves might have tried to get in even if they've not succeeded this time. Next slide, please. So what can you do if you think you've got a problem with vandalism or theft? So this is about crime awareness and reducing the risk of crime. Smart water, I hope you're already aware of, but if you're not, this is a kind of invisible paint that is applied to roofs and metal downpipes and other areas of metal on your church. It actually contains something, we call it DNA for churches. I'm not sure what the exact chemical is, but the point is that the chemical has a very slightly different makeup on every bottle that's issued. So by keeping a record of a batch number of the smart water that you use, if a theft occurs and that metal is recovered from the criminal or from a scrapyard, the police can actually use ultraviolet light, I think it is, to actually detect the exact chemical that was used and trace it back to your building, which means it can actually secure a conviction for that theft. And because criminals know this, it is a real deterrent to them to have smart water on your building. And ecclesiastical insurance actually make it a condition of their insurance. They will only cover roof metal theft if your metal was painted with smart water. If you haven't used smart water, you're not covered for that loss. And because of that, ecclesiastical do offer a discounted price on buying it through them. So that's something important to be noted. And also you should put up these warning signs to say that it's been applied. Something else you can use is anti-climb paint. Again, that's a deterrent to vandals because they know that it will stick to their clothing and their hands, and again, if they're caught, that can be detected. And again, you need to put signs up warning that has been used. The next slide, please. If you find that isn't enough of a deterrent, then the next stage is to go along some kind of monitoring or alarm system. So the three elements here that you might want to consider are external lighting. That comes into two categories. So it can be a dusk to dawn sensor where the light comes on all night. That's more useful where you're actually trying to illuminate the area for people who are legitimately around your church, if there's a path through the churchyard, for example. It's not particularly a deterrent, that. A better deterrent is to have the PIR lights, which come on when they detect movement in the area, and come on for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. That's more of a deterrent to thieves because they suddenly find themselves in the spotlight. That can be installed with List B permission. Roof alarms, provided you use an ecclesiastical approved supplier such as eBound. There are others, but eBound's the leading supplier. You can install a roof alarm without needing any diocesan permission. And the All Churches Trust, which is a grant-giving arm of ecclesiastical, do offer grants for that purpose, because obviously it then reduces their risk as an insurer. And then finally, the sort of gold standard, as it were, if all else fails, is to install a CCTV system. And if you're thinking that that might be necessary, then we would suggest that you discuss it first, both with the DAC team, because it will need a faculty, and also with your local crime prevention officer, who will be able to advise on the best placement of cameras around the building. And if you do have that, it is a legal requirement that you put up these notices that say that CCTV is being used, and that give the contact details of the person responsible for controlling it. That's on the data protection legislation. The other thing to note is that if you do install CCTV, the coverage area must only be on your own church premises. You have to take care not to accidentally cover someone's back garden or a public footpath, public road. It has to be just on your premises. Next, please. So that's the end of what I have to say about crime awareness and so on. So we now move on to questions. There doesn't seem to be anything in the chat, so perhaps if Janet can unmute people, then we can see who wants to ask a question.